It was a large room. There were many shelves of books, a metal helmet for a stallion from the times of the Crusades, and there was the vertebra of a whale from a bay in Antarctica. In one alcove was the earliest known photograph of a snowflake. The child entered the silence and stillness of the vast interior through the far door. She came past the fishing canoe resting on a long, low table under the window. She was 7 years old, and her name was Helen. Two buildings stood next to each other at the center of the room. Each was taller than the girl, was perhaps 4 times her height. During that early morning hour, the light still only half awake, she stood looking at them. They appeared to be mosques, and they were beautiful, with their families of domes and semi-domes and minarets. She thought of them as 2 elaborate hats or headdresses, possibly meant for jinns, or a pair of giants from a fairy tale. She considered taking a few additional steps and peering through one of their windows. The colors and features were so precise and assorted, the muted shine on the walls and the arcs of the domes. She reached out and touched the detail of a painted leaf. Building situated within a room! Exclamation mark. Normally, it was a room that existed within a building, was contained by it. She described a circle around them now. She went past the cupboard where stood the vase of dried branches brought back from Russia. They were from the apple trees that Count Tolstoy had planted with his own hands. 4 of them were still alive in his orchard. The girl stopped when one of the buildings produced a creak, as though it were experiencing a mild earthquake. It stirred now and rose a few inches, breaking free of gravity, swaying a little. And then it ascended further, beginning to travel at a languid pace towards the ceiling. It was being pulled up by the delicate-seeming yet strong chains that were attached to the tips of its minarets. Eventually it came to a stop, up there in the high distance. The immense room she was in was a library and a study, a place of fertile solitude. Due to its size, it was difficult to heat in the winter months. Not long ago, they had the idea of bringing in 2 small cabins, each just large enough to house a desk and chair, a stack of immediately necessary books, and papers, and a small heater. The thinking was that from December to February, a person would go into one of the cabins, close the door behind her, and work in that pocket of warmth. From ordinary cabins, however, they had become detailed models of 2 historic buildings, the great mosques of Cordoba and the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul. The girl had caught glimpses of them being constructed during the previous few weeks. Now they were ready, and because it was June, they were being winched up to remain suspended up there until December. After the Hagia Sophia, she watched the great mosque of Cordoba being pulled up by the system of pulleys and chains. Neither of the 2 buildings had a floor of its own. They would borrow the room's floor when they were down here. So when Helen looked up now, she could see into the interiors. She imagined moths fluttering like trapped prayers under the miniature domes in the evenings, bumping against the colored insides. She would always remember this handful of moments from her early years, childhood, when minutes could feel as prolonged as hours and the days vanished in the blink of an eye. It was Helen's father who had carpentered the buildings, and it was he who was causing them to rise through the air, storing them out of the way. She turned and looked at him where he stood at the other end of the room, operating the various cranks and pulleys located near the corner. She liked the fact that he made one last minor adjustment to the chains, making sure both buildings were at exactly the same height. He was a tall, bright-blooded man, and his name was Lily. Thank you.
I'm thrilled that you read the section with the bird partner.
I saw him in Lahore.
Yes.
And I didn't know who he was, what he was doing. It's like those candles that you burn in the church.
You know, I remember, I think somebody had written a review of your work that I saw, and they talked about that as being part of your magical realism. And it never occurred to me that that was magical realism. That just, that made all kinds of sense to me. Now, if you allow a doubt about the existence of God in your mind, you need a really impressive bird. You've just admitted to this whole audience that you're an atheist. So what would you need to free a herd of ostriches? Maybe the bald eagle that attacks Donald Trump. If you release him, you're forgiven of all your sins.
Okay. I don't know what to say.
I wanted to start out, you know, my introduction to your work was reading The Blind Man's Garden. And I was reading it, in advance copy, I was reading it in Central Park. And my parents were living in Boston at the time. And I got a text, and I was in the midst of the section of the school.
Oh God, I know what you're going to say.
A terrorist attack in the novel. And I got a text from my brother, one of my brothers, saying, "Mom and Dad are okay." And of course it was the Boston bombing.
Yeah.
And it was, you know, I had this, you know, of course you go to the news when something like that happens. And you have these very shocking, horrific images, and this very thin stream of information, right? Just the barest details, you know nothing about who did it, or you know, or even the people who really suffered. You just have these really viscerally upsetting images. And it immediately became apparent to me that the most useful thing that I could be reading to try and understand and to think about what an act like this means was your book. Because I was in the midst of people in Pakistan suffering at the hands of these people, people who'd been richly imagined, people who I'd come to love and care about. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the way that you see that fiction can enter in when we're talking about these sort of broad historical movements that we have such strong opinions about and oftentimes too little feeling.
Yes, I think that's the thing, that through fiction we can bring in the feeling. That's a perfect way of saying it. And growing up, I remember in the 90s, reading the newspapers, and there was a feeling of anxiety as you read the newspaper sequentially, page by page. There would be a feeling of anxiety building up. And once I had noticed it, and I then had to ask myself, well, keep an eye on the explanation for this. Why is this happening? As you begin to read the newspaper, you become more and more tense. And I don't know how the American newspapers are arranged, but in Britain, the Times, the Telegraph, and the Guardian, the national news is at the front, and the international pages are deeper first. So I was getting closer and closer to the international pages where the horror was in the 90s. That was what I realized after a few months of watching myself. Why are you getting tense as you read the newspaper? And I'm not a very quick thinker. It takes me a while to understand why I'm feeling certain things. So, but now, as you said, it happened in Boston. So now the horror is on the front page. And the thing fiction can do is that it can make a human being from the ground up. And it can tell you what is his favorite food, the size of his shoes, what makes him gasp at night. Sometimes there's a memory that comes and you think, oh, I wish that hadn't happened. So all of that, layer by layer, he went to this school, that happened, layer by layer. And to say that during the Zia regime in the 1980s, X number of people were tortured. That's one thing, that's the job of nonfiction.